Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so before we start this video, two things. One, for those of you guys who are curious about the selling of RobCore rings, that was not a one-off. I'm gonna sell them again, but I'm gonna do it again. I'm not gonna leave you guys just once. Two, those rings sold out in 2 hours. Now, I have not found a way on Etsy to show that the rings were sold out, right? As soon as a single ring type sold out, then like Etsy automatically delisted it, right? So that's why some of you guys went to the store and you didn't see anything there because they were all sold out, right? But in 2 hours, they were all gone. For those of you guys who did buy RobCore rings, you should be able to go onto Etsy and you should see the status of your order. They should all be on their way. The only exception is we got an order from a guy in Norway and we had a little bit of a complication. It was on our end. It was not anything you did wrong, but we fixed it and everything's all sorted out. So we will order more RobCore rings and we will send out more RobCore rings and I will place more up for sale. So keep your ears open and I will let you guys know when you can buy them. So anyway, on to the video. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking up with the conclusion of S.W.O.R.D. I hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving week. I know I did. I definitely needed that break. I absolutely needed that break. I was going nuts. I think we've been probably doing this nonstop for about 2 years without really taking a break, so I needed one. But we are picking back up with the conclusion of S.W.O.R.D, right? We're wrapping this whole thing up. And initially I thought about doing each of these individuals separately, but I think at this point we can just kind of do all the videos together and just sort of call it a day. I do want to touch on the Hellions because we're going to kind of skip over this. The Hellions was a totally unnecessary story. I'm not really sure why it was included in this in the first place. The only real takeaway, for those of you guys who remember, the only real thing going on with the Hellions is that their goal was to get into Otherworld and steal the swords of Araco so they couldn't even compete in the first place, which would basically seem to nullify the entire tournament. Now, as we saw, not all the fights were being done with swords. Really, only those who needed swords would be disqualified, but then Saturnyne probably would have changed things. What ended up happening with the Hellions, however, is that it was revealed that Sinister simply wanted to just steal genes of mutants that existed out there. And once the other Hellions found out, Sinister managed to achieve his goal to a degree, and then came back to the Krakoan gate, back into the main Marvel universe, so to speak, and then pretty much killed all the Hellions, and that was basically it, right? So there's a little bit going on there, but not a whole lot. Certainly nothing that that warrants us covering the entirety of the story. But what's really important here is we pick up with the next part of the tournament, which takes place in Cable, and this is done by virtue of Cable having to face off against Bay. Now, of course, Bay is the wife of Doug Ramsey, right? She's the wife of Cypher, and so Cable's kind of watching all this, or I guess he's really kind of engaging in this, knowing that he's probably going to have to kill the wife of Doug Ramsey, and in that moment of hesitation, Bay gets the upper hand. Now, here's the big difference, because Cable says things like, if I had been who I was before, then this probably never would have been a problem in the first place, and that's true. One of the things, for those of you guys who aren't really familiar here, and I've heard people ask this, why is Cable so young? Marvel introduced a retcon by basically having Cable's younger self kill his older self and then take his place as kind of like the new Cable. It was a way for Marvel to kind of reinvigorate the character a little bit. I kind of feel like it was unnecessary. The older Cable had a lot of great storytelling going on, and I think in situations, he would have been a lot more interesting, useful, and would have made the stories a lot more intriguing, but such as it is, we ended up getting younger Cable instead. Now, the problem with younger Cable is he's not quite battle hardened yet, not in the same way that his older self is. And he's right when he says, if this was his older self, he would have killed Bay like that, right? It would have just been over. Like, he would have just killed her in an instant and would have been like, cool, like, we get the point, done. And he would have like watched Doug Ramsey cry, and he probably would have comforted him and said, hey man, I'm sorry, but like, the entire kingdom of Krakoa and the entire, like, our entire earth is more important than your wife, right? So with that being the case, with Bay getting the upper hand, with Cable kind of hesitating for a moment, Bay basically topples him, she breaks his arm, and then she goes for the killing blow, and Doug jumps in and asks her to stop, right? He says, like, stop, like, you've basically won, this is supposed to be finished, right? And Saturnyne had kind of declared this was going to be a battle to the death, right? It was going to be a fight to the actual death itself, but then she kind of relinquishes here and says, but some deaths are of the spirit, right? So in the end, I award the point to Araco. Krakoa is now down, basically it's 18-6, right? They're down by 12 points. This is a pretty huge number to have to catch up. Now from there, you end up picking up with Cable contacting Jean Grey and Cyclops directly, which is something that he's not really supposed to be doing, right? Using his telepathy and managing to reach to them. But the fact that he was able to do this, to essentially use his telepathy telepathic powers to reach across dimensional barriers and contact Jean and Cyclops, that's a huge thing, right? This is really more of an act of desperation. But for people who create like respect threads, right? Like the power of the telepathy of the power of like Cable's telepathy or like Jean Grey's telepathy or something like that. This is one of those examples they will use, right? They'll just say like, was able to use his telepathy across dimensional barriers, right? Or something along those lines, right? That's where this kind of stuff comes from. But the reality of this is Cable looks at the situation and says, it's dire and we're probably going to lose, right? Like we're down 18-6. The deck basically seems to be stacked against us. Like she wants us to lose. I'm not really sure why, you know, I'm not really sure what's going on here. I'm going to stay here and fight as much as I can, but like tell Esme, right? Of the stepford Cuckoos, the kind of girlfriend of Cable, tell her I love her, right? I mean, that's kind of where this is. Now Saturnyne steps in and cuts off his connection. And that's when Cyclops and Jean are like, okay, we need to do something. Now we'll get back to them here in a second. What we're going to do here is we're going to focus on Gorgon, right? He's the next fight. Now Gorgon is one of these guys, and the reason why he wears a bandana around his head is that if he takes it off and he looks at you, you'll turn to stone. But he's being made to face off against White Sword. But facing off against White Sword is not just fighting him, it's fighting his 100 soldiers. And so he says, like, you'll fight me after you fight all of them. And so he says, like, once you get through all 100 of these guys, then we'll battle. And so he says, number one, right? This first guy comes running in, gets his head chopped off in an instant. Then it's 2 and 3. Those guys get taken down. Then it's 4, 5, and 6, right? Those guys get turned to stone, and one of them manages to make it through and gouge out the eyes of Gorgon. So his primary power is basically gone here. And so now he's basically just fighting using his own prodigious martial arts skill, but then it's, now you have to fight all the rest of the other ones, right? You have to fight seemingly all of them. And so what ends up happening is that Gorgon actually takes out something like 13 of like the White Sword's champions, which moves the number up, right? So it actually gives them a lead, right? Because each one of these individuals that he kills counts as a point. So it kind of seems like Saturnyne's more or less balancing the numbers. And so now Krakoa is ahead 19-8. And that's when the horsemen step in and say, end this, right? Because if he kills all 100 of your soldiers, it's going to move them up. They're going to be 106-18. They're going to crush us, right? Like there's not going to be any chance for us to win. Like the tournament will basically be over, right? I mean, there's not enough, not enough opponents for us to face off against to finish this, right? To come out on top. Now, so that's when White Sword steps in and says, okay, fine, then the battle will be between the two of us. And it's one of these things where Gorgon knows he's not going to win, right? Like he knows he cannot come out on top here. There's no possible way for that to happen. And the White Sword says, I'm going to kill you, and then I will bring you into my army. And the response of Gorgon is, not a chance, right? I walk my own path. Whatever happens to me after this, whatever death awaits me, whatever comes next in this afterlife, it will not be as one of your henchmen, right? And that's when White Sword's like, okay, fine. If you don't want to be, then you don't have to be, right? And then just punches a sword through his chest and basically kills him. Now, there's two cool things that come out of this. The first is Apocalypse kind of commenting and saying, this is how a mutant dies. If you're going to die, you die on your own terms. You die in saying, I'm not going to be a subject to anybody else, right? You die with what you perceive to be your own honor. The other thing that comes out of this is that Gorgon was, I wouldn't necessarily say an essential member of the X-Men roster, but somebody who probably could do with a bit of revamping. And the reason why is because Gorgon's never really had major roles in Marvel for quite some time. This is kind of an exciting moment because it could be one of these things where Marvel just never chooses to bring him back, right? Hickman just kind of writes him out and he's gone. Or it could be they bring him back and he's totally changed, because remember, he died here in Otherworld, which means if they resurrect him, he'll come back in any number of different versions of himself from across the multiverse. We don't know which version it'll be. So he could come back with better powers. He could come back weaker. He could come back as just some old sage wise man who never fights. He could come back in a wide array of different forms. But with Gorgon having been destroyed, right now the score is currently even. Arakko 19, Krakoa 19. And I need you to keep that in mind. Hold that in your mind as long as you can, because this will become important, because this leads into the final battle between Apocalypse and his wife, who's donning the helmet of annihilation. One of the things that happens here is that Apocalypse challenges his wife to face him off as herself, right? To basically not use the power of annihilation or any of that stuff, to really just kind of husband and wife dueling each other. But the other thing that comes out of this is really more with Jean Grey and Cyclops, that with the message they receive from Cable and the fact that things seem so dire, they go to the Quiet Council, right? And they say, like, we need to go do this. Like, we need to go rescue our son. And the Quiet Council's in a bit of a predicament, right? Because the biggest issue they face is that when they ask Cyclops, what is it you intend to do? Cyclops' response is twofold. One, I'm gonna assemble a strike team. This strike team is gonna be a smash and grab job, right? We're just gonna break into the other world. We're gonna pass in there. We're gonna grab our X-Men and we're gonna come back. We need you to hold the gate open until we do. Now, the issue with the Quiet Council is, but what if you die over there, right? If you die over there, there'd be no way for us to know, right? Because Saturnyne has cut off any telepathic communications to that realm. So it's not like we can maintain a telepathic lifeline and know whether or not you survived and say, oh my God, Cyclops and Jean and all the X-Men are dead. All right, close the portal so nobody can get in. They just kind of have to wait and see. But if they die over there and there's no way of knowing they died, they could potentially just be holding the portal open for an invasion that they didn't know was coming. So they could literally sow their own end. The other part of this is that Jean Grey and Cyclops are part of the Quiet Council. And so it'd basically be taking away from their number. Now, anybody who's familiar with governmental positions knows that usually individuals who hold positions of government are not afforded the opportunity of putting their life on the line. Leaders don't have that luxury, right? Because somebody has to govern. It's the responsibility you take on. And so what this means is that while Cyclops and Jean are simply just going to go, right? It's one of these things where it's like, we're gonna find a way to leave. So you're gonna have to like lock us up or something. Then in turn, the Quiet Council, now that they're met with the idea that like Nightcrawler wants to go, their concern is, okay, then what do we do now, right? What do we do in this instance where the Quiet Council could potentially lose 3 or 4 of their number? Do we simply just hope they come back in one piece? Do we ensure the governing body can function the way that it's supposed to? Because remember, everybody here has a role to play. So the government has to continue on. And so in order to basically satisfy this need, to answer this question, a vote is given. And the vote is given in 2 forms. The first vote is, if you guys pass through that gate and you die, and there's no way for us to know that you die, and we could be holding the gate open for enemies, then that means we have to close the gate, right? We can't take the chance that if you perish there and we don't know, that we allow all the enemies to come flooding in, right? Any chance that we have of closing the gate will be gone at that point. And so what they say is, the first vote is, do we close the gate after the forces of the strike team, Jean Grey, Cyclops, after they all pass through? The answer is yes, right? We close the gate. The second concern is, what do we do about you guys leaving the Quiet Council and potentially dying? So do we just kind of hope that you guys make it back in one piece? Do we put the entire government on hold in order to, in order to find out whether you made it back, never knowing how long it could take you to get back? That if something went wrong and you guys were stuck there for decades and decades, or you guys just grew old there and died because you could never find a way back, do we just kind of allow the Quiet Council to function in its own way without you guys there? Or do we fill your seats? And when they vote, the answer is, if you go, you lose your spot, right? We're going to replace you with somebody else. But at the end of the day, Jean and Cyclops don't care. Their stance is, we don't care. Like, we are going, right? We're going to go with this. Apocalypse is already there, right? And it may very well be that he might perish, that there's individuals who are out there that are supposed to be on the council that could very well die. And so because of that, they've already lost so many of their number, they effectively vote. If Jean Grey and Cyclops pass through this gate and they take this strike team and they go to Otherworld for this mission, then they give up their position on the Quiet Council. And Jean Grey and Cyclops say, we're okay with that, and they leave, right? They basically walk away. Because it's one of these things where they say, if the Quiet Council is the government of Krakoa, then the X-Men are its heroes. And of what use are heroes who refuse to fight? My allegiance is to the mutant population. My allegiance is to the people. And if we as the Quiet Council are going to sit and just rest on our laurels effectively, and just kind of not really do anything in the face of such dire straits, then of what use are we, right? And so Cyclops and Jean basically leave. And where you would expect some measure of condemnation from the Quiet Council, instead, it's really Magneto and Xavier who were just like, that's exactly how we raised you. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. And it's one of these things where we can kind of assume a lot of the reasons why some of these folks don't leave could very well be tied to like Moira McTaggart and the idea that like there's this kind of greater game that was established during the House and Powers of X, and the sense that like if they perish, everything would come to an end. It really seems to point to the idea that Jean Grey and Cyclops are not really that essential to the future survival of the X-Men. Either that, or this is something that has to happen, right? But regardless of the situation, they basically pass through and they go into Otherworld itself. And so picking back up with Apocalypse and his wife, things are interesting here. And this is kind of cool. It's this really, really amazing moment where the wife of Apocalypse gets the upper hand, right? Genesis gets the upper hand on him and like destroys his sword and says, okay, like I give you one last kiss and then I will hear your surrender and welcome you back to your rightful place by my side. And then she like when she destroys the sword, she asks like, will you yield, Apocalypse? Here's the thing to understand about Apocalypse, right? Always outnumbered, never outgunned, right? Apocalypse is not a guy who falls easily, right? This is not a man who yields. And that's exactly what he says, man. Jonathan Hickman, man. Jonathan Hickman, man. Man, man, it's like one of the coolest moments, because Apocalypse is like, I will not yield, not to fear, not to doubt, and not to love. Where Genesis thought she had the upper hand, in 4 moves, it's bap, 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 and then she's done, right? That's the end of Genesis. Like literally, like just swipes right through, and that's that. You know, and it's nuts, because that's the thing, man. Apocalypse, man, people, man, she's sleeping on Apocalypse, son. Like that's exactly what it is. And that's what makes it so crazy, is because with her basically being defeated, Apocalypse is like, I don't want this, right? He looks at Saturnyne and he's like, I don't want this, right? I don't want to kill my own wife. I'm not in favor of this. Now keep in mind, the score is still 19-19. Whoever wins this wins the contest. And so with that, Saturnyne's like, I don't really care what it is that you want, right? Like the tournament must go on. You must slay your wife or be slayed by your wife for a victor to be determined here. But in this moment, when Apocalypse and Saturnyne are having this conversation, then suddenly, like, Genesis puts on the helmet of annihilation, completely heals herself, and it's just like, nothing is settled, right? Like, I, Annihilation, am now in total control here. Nothing is settled, right? Like, this will go on and we will fight. Now, when that happens, right? Like, when she dons the helmet of annihilation, she calls in everyone, like literally all the forces of Amenth just come pouring into Otherworld. At this point, it's just like, man, the hell with the tournament, son. Like, we're just gonna do this right now. Like, that's exactly what this is, right? Now, the different little fairy people, whatever they are, the fish folk of like the forces of Saturnyne, right here, little assistants, aides, whatever they are, they immediately run and grab like the little like this kind of box, right, that contains all these little puzzle pieces, more or less. And the idea is that when Saturnyne puts this together, it will effectively give her an answer on what her next move needs to be, on what it is that she needs to do in this. But without, you know, beyond Saturnyne, what's going on right now is all hell is breaking loose, son. Like, all these forces of Amenth are pouring in here, and you've got like 6 X-Men and Captain Britain basically facing off against them all, doing everything they can. Now, where Amenth goes for the killing blow against Apocalypse, and seemingly he's just gonna let it happen, right? Like, out of nowhere, she's struck by lightning, right? Out of nowhere, she's struck by lightning, enters Storm, right? Storm's like, okay, so she's only gonna be delayed for so long, right? Like, she's only gonna be delayed for so long. Like, we've got her armies routed. We have to get out of here, right? Like, we have to leave. And the response of Apocalypse is like, not a chance, man. Like, no way there's no way I'm leaving my wife behind. But at this point, it's not even the stance of Apocalypse and what he wants. It's like run away, live to fight another day, right? Like, we can get out of here. We can get back to Krakoa. Yes, I guess, I mean, the score is currently tied. We can figure this out later, right? But like, for right now, we need reinforcements or numbers or something. While that's going on, Bay actually ends up abandoning the forces of Araco, grabs Doug Ramsey, and just runs, right? Just like takes off running, right? It's just like, okay. So like, she snatches up her husband, right? Because, you know, she's like, hey, you know, I need to make a man out of you before we're done. So she snatches him up. They just go running. And so all the X-Men, what's left of these guys, are basically just fighting to the point of exhaustion. They're just fighting like to this moment, to this point of exhaustion. And there's not a whole lot that they can do here. It's just like at this point, you've got what? You've got Captain Britain, you've got Wolverine, you've got Apocalypse, you got Storm, and you got Magic. And that's it against this virtually endless horde of all these guys. Well, then out of nowhere, here comes Jubilee, right? Like, here comes Jubilee coming in with like all these fairy folk, right? Because she was just kind of hanging out with them for a little while, I guess. It's by no means like a turn, like it's not like it's like the battle is turned, right? I mean, it's Jubilee. She creates fireworks, right? She's like, you know, pew 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 pew. She creates fireworks, right? There's really nothing going on there. But at the very least, their numbers are temporarily bolstered, and it does give them a chance to kind of survive this experience. Now, what you also end up having is Doug Ramsey talking to Bay and saying, look, like, basically, I love you, right? I mean, that's more or less what he says, right? It's this declaration of love, like, I absolutely love you, but we cannot stay here, right? We can't just run away from my friends. We have to go back. We have to help them survive. Like, we have to make sure that they live through all this, right? We have to find a way to end this tournament. I can't just leave them alone. And so one of the things he kind of asks her, he's like, you don't have to stay here, right? You don't have to stay with Araco. You can come back. When this is all said and done, you can come back to Krakoa and you can live among us, right? You can live at my place. Like, we're married, right? So, I mean, you know, it'll take a little bit of decorating. I mean, it's a bachelor pad. You know, it was a bachelor pad until like a day ago when we got married, you know, and happened out of nowhere, and I wasn't really expecting it. But, you know, I mean, surprises happen in this game of life. You know, I don't know what to tell you. So it's kind of a it's kind of a cool little thing. But like, basically, of course, Bay ends up traveling back, you know, and it's so the forces are marshaled a little bit larger, but still, there's not much they can do here. The funny thing about that that is that when all this begins to happen, as all this is taking place, you know, Annihilation, you know, basically Genesis, you know, it's more or less possessed by Annihilation now. It's like we won, right? Like we basically won here. This not necessarily formal because I haven't killed Apocalypse, but I'm going to, right? I'm going to destroy this guy. Well, then from there, we switch over to Saturnyne. And as Saturnyne is assembling this puzzle piece, that's when she begins to realize, oh my God, right? She has to reassemble the Captain Britain core. More so than that, this kind of puzzle that seems to have existed before she ever took over was, you know, it's a little ambiguous. It all seems to point to the idea of like the definitive Captain Britain. And the definitive Captain Britain is Betsy Braddock, right? Like the fates have more or less determined it's Betsy Braddock. Now, when I say the fates, I don't mean some individual out there who put this, you know, box of pieces here and then said, okay, you know, now Saturnyne, you're in for a surprise when you find out who the person's supposed to be. You know, it's just one of these things where it looks like it's out of her control. That's one of the things about Otherworld is it's very, very ambiguous, right? There's a lot of talk about the fates and how things could unfold and, you know, how it could end and whether or not things would turn out the way that you hoped it to. It's one of those things that's a little ambiguous, but the big takeaway from all this is the Captain Britain core completely gets reformed by Saturnyne, right? She reforms the entire core and the entire core comes responding, right? They come pouring in, right? They all come flying in and it's like, okay, like our numbers are bolstered, like we have a chance. The fact that the Captain Britain core is reformed is pretty cool, right? We haven't seen them since the events of the Incursions when they were all killed by the map makers and the Beyonders, right? So this is the first time that we're seeing the Captain Britain core fully reassembled. Now, for the forces of Annihilation, as she continues fighting and as the Captain Britain core comes showing up, they're not really putting up a huge fight, right? There's not really a whole lot doing here, and they're actually getting taken out quite readily. But what she says in response to all this is like, they summon an army, summon one of our own. And she talks to like War, right? She's like, summon one of our own. So they summon all these just hellious looking creatures, all these just terrible looking monsters from the world of like, literally from like Annihilation's realm. Summon like all these different huge monstrous beasts and things like that. Like it's getting kind of crazy, right? It's getting absolutely bonkers. And it's one of these things where you end up having Cyclops and Jean who chime into magic. Now here's the thing that happens, man. Here's the thing that happens. Here's the thing that happens, man. So she hits up Cyclops and Jean. Man, let me tell you something. Like Cyclops and Jean hit up magic and they say, okay, like you need to open a portal for us, right? Like we have our forces here, you need to open a portal. And they're like, she's like, okay, like I was wondering how long it would take for you guys to get here, right? So slams her sword into the ground, opens a portal, and when she does, it brings in the entire S.W.O.R.D space station, right? This whole S.W.O.R.D space station, when it opens up, everybody comes pouring out, right? So you've got Gwenpool, you've got Dupe, you've got Gambit, right? You got all kinds of people here. You got Quentin Quire. So you've got like this huge mishmash of like all these Omega level mutants and all that stuff. Like it's like almost the entire forces of Krakoa. Like everybody who's currently an X-Man comes pouring out into this thing and all hell breaks loose. Man, let me tell you something. Jonathan Hickman, man. Jonathan Hickman, man. Man, they were not prepared. Dude, the forces of Amenth, just like it is an absolute massacre, right? Like it's an absolute bloodbath. So they start summoning even more of their monsters, right? Like even more of their absolute monsters. They're like, she's like, summon it all, summon everything, right? Bring everything in here that you possibly can. So all these monsters start pouring in here, right? Like all these things just start dumping in here. The X-Men are all like fighting for their fighting for their lives, man. Like it's absolutely bonkers. And so from there, like you have Cable who's kind of watching all this unfold, and he's like, it doesn't look like there's really a way for us to win. And Saturnyne's kind of talking to him, and she's like, what card were you dealt? And he was like, the Fool. And she's like, only a fool would really look at this sword and believes that's all he's really holding. Now, remember back when X's Swords was going on, remember back when they were in the S.W.O.R.D space station, and the whole S.W.O.R.D space station was taken over by those crazy looking monsters, right? Those crazy looking monsters that only desire death and destruction, right? You guys remember that? And they managed to push them all back through that portal and lock them away in their realm of death. What ends up happening is Cable's just like, oh my God, right? Like I totally forgot about that. This is why Jonathan Hickman does this stuff, because they've got an army of forces that are just in the thousands and thousands and thousands that seemingly match the forces of Arakko, right? Or at least that seems to be the case, right? That like match that huge army, the forces of Amenth. Like it's just waiting in the wings. All they have to do is just unleash it, right? And so like Cable's like, get me to the ship, right? Get me to the S.W.O.R.D ship, get me to that device where all we have to do is unlock it. And they're like, okay. So as soon as they get in there and they literally unlock that door, all those forces forces come pouring in like hell, right? Like Ilyana Rasputin makes a portal, so they all go flying into that portal, and they show up into this realm and just start killing everything they find, right? I mean, if anything, it's like Lord of the Rings. You guys remember like that army of the dead guys, the ghosts or whatever it is? Like as soon as they show up, like the whole battle just turns, right? That's exactly what happens. There's this amazing moment, right? Where like one of these monster things are like, we've suffered in a dead realm for far too long, picked its bones, examined it fully. Now we seek a heartier meal. And like in Amenth, right? Annihilation, right? Like this chick, the helmet chick with the wife of Apocalypse, she's like, you want the full measure of a world? Then come, creature, taste my metal and feast on Amenth, and like just annihilates this guy, right? Like I love the way that Jonathan Hickman does like these one-liners, like they're just so ridiculously cool. And so like from there, like where she goes to make this other statement, Apocalypse grabs her, right? It's like tackles her down to the ground and rips the helmet off her face, right? Like rips the helmet of Amenth off the face of Genesis. And remember, the helmet of Amenth has its own mind, right? It does its own thing. You know, anybody who wears the helmet is possessed by the helmet. And so Apocalypse puts the helmet on. Everybody stops, right? Everybody stops and it's just like, dude, holy cow, is this really gonna happen right now? Is Apocalypse gonna put the helmet on? And Apocalypse grabs it and sits it on its head. And like, and literally, he's just like, I am remade, right? I am Apocalypse, you know, I am totally remade. And Annihilation Amenth tries to take over Apocalypse, right? Like Annihilation tries to take over Apocalypse, and like, and initially it seems to be successful, but then like Apocalypse takes over control, right? He takes over control of the helmet, and it's just like, no, like I am Apocalypse. I'm not some servant to some arbitrary object that exists out there that some demon entity's in possession of, right? Like when you step into the realm of Apocalypse's sphere of influence, you fall to the influence of Apocalypse, right? I will not be controlled by anybody, and just totally dominates the helmet. Now, while all that's happening, and the way in which we know that everything is going to turn is Iska turns against the forces of Arakko, and that's when they realize we're not going to win, right? Like literally her power is to always win. So as soon as she turncoats, then it's like, okay, then we've basically lost here. And that's when Apocalypse steps to Saturnyne and says, can you hear me? And she says, yes, I can hear you and I can see you. And then he says, then fine, I, as a host of annihilation and the leader of the forces of the Arakko army, I surrender, and just gives up. And that gives the win to Krakoa, right? Krakoa wins. Dude, it's amazing, man. It's just like, dude, that's such a ridiculously cool idea. And then Saturnyne's like, cool, done, let's do this, right? So she goes flying in with the Shogo dragon, right? Whose dragon fire, remember, has the ability to melt realms, and just like literally punches a hole in this fabric of space, which rips through all the forces of Amenth, right? It rips them all through, and even those weird demonic looking force entity guys, right? Like, so they're all more or less out of the way. The weird guys from the other dimension, they're all pulled back in. The forces of Amenth are just kind of waiting to find out what their orders are going to be, essentially, like what do we do now? And so essentially the helmet is pulled off of Apocalypse. Saturnyne restructures it and turns it into a staff, which is actually really cool. And then from there, it's kind of like, okay, so like now that this contest is basically done, then I want a show of good faith, right? I want a show of good faith that you guys are not going to wage war against each other again. And when the question is, what's this show of good faith? She's like, I want a mutant from Krakoa to go to Arakko, and I want a mutant from Arakko to go to Krakoa. That's what I require. That's what I ask. Now, with Apocalypse, basically he ends up going with the Arakko forces, right? He ends up joining Arakko. Now, this does not mean that Marvel's getting rid of Apocalypse. If anything, they're probably just kind of keeping him on the back burner for a little while, because in reality, this whole S.W.O.R.D event was a story about Apocalypse, right? That's basically all this was. It was just a story about Apocalypse. But when the question's asked, who basically speaks for Krakoa? Who from Krakoa is going to demand somebody from Arakko come to their location? Apocalypse says, as the only member, or really the highest ranking member of the Quiet Council here, I will speak for Krakoa. And the person that I choose from Arakko to come to Krakoa is the entire Arakko nation, the entire island itself, right? I want the island of Arakko. And that's true. Remember, Arakko is a sentient island, and it was one half of Krakoa when they were Okara, right? That's the whole idea. And they were split in the sense of like all these forces showing up in the first place. And Apocalypse was basically the one that did it. He's reuniting the island of Krakoa with Arakko, recreating Okara, but he's doing it at the sacrifice of himself. He is leading with his forces. And it's one of these cool things, because what it does is it transforms the character of Apocalypse. It takes him away from this guy who's just like, oh, we're just gonna destroy stuff and test the people who are, you know, the most fit to make sure they're actually fit, you know, and just kind of be a dick from time to time. And, and it transformed him from like that guy into, I am basically sacrificing my place on the Quiet Council so I can be with my wife and my kids, right? It makes him a tragic hero, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. That's why stories like this are so cool, because Jonathan Hickman is so good at changing up the entirety of characters. And so what you get here is a little bit of an epilogue, and I'm not going to spoil too much here because I believe this is going to go into, what is it, the reign of X, and like, and okay, I'll throw this out there. It looks like Jim Jaspers is going to kind of seize control, right? Like it's going to focus on Jim Jaspers kind of rising to control, and then who knows what's going to happen, right? Who has an answer? Because here's something I want to make clear to you guys. Saturnyne was bound by magic, right? She's bound by the limits of magic. So there's only so much you can do there. She's bound by like the limits of fate and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to Otherworld, it's all kinds of tradition, fate, all pomp and circumstance, all that kind of stuff. Jim Jaspers is a crazy guy with the ability to manipulate up to, you know, everything up to and including the multiverse, right? This guy is just is on a whole nother level, right? Like Jim Jaspers is ridiculous. Now, like Jim Jaspers, if he's anything like the way he was before, but has more fine-tuned control over his powers, then they've probably been expanded, right? And if they've been expanded, if Jim, let me put it this way. If Jim Jaspers' weakness that he has to have a reality to manipulate in order to, you know, be at his absolute peak, if that weakness is removed, Jim Jaspers is right up there with like the Living Tribunal. If that's removed, I'm not saying it is, but if that's removed, Jim Jaspers is well beyond the Marquis of Death and Matthew Malloy and Protege and all those guys. He's right up there with the Living Tribunal, if not between the Living Tribunal and the One Above All, right? There's no limit to what he can do. That's a big if, and we don't even have any idea what they're going to do with this character, right? So don't take this as an absolute truth. I'm not saying that it is, but it's kind of bonkers, right? It's kind of crazy because when the dust settles and everything, Saturnyne really kind of retakes her place as the omniversal magistrix, and she got pretty much everything she wanted. The reformation of the Captain Britain Corps. The one person she didn't get was Brian Braddock. You know, she of course wanted him more than anybody else, but in essence, the entire Omniversal Development Corps has been restored. She's back to being the Omniversal Magistrix, and the Captain Britain Corps has been returned. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to cover the original Mad Jim Jaspers story. All that stuff is coming back, right? All that stuff is basically back to the way it was before. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. I loved S.W.O.R.D. I love the S.W.O.R.D event. It was so good. But if you guys are new here to Comments Explain, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.